To our summer meeting, our Happy Independence Day week to all. I'm Jack Glassman, chair of the committee. I'm also a historical architect with the National Park Service regional office, working on projects from Maine to Virginia throughout the park system. And why don't we, wish we could go around the room, but let's virtually just have round the room introduction thoughts. Going to, as I customarily do, just cover some current events. I just wanted to insert, not on the agenda, but sort of some couple of plugs that just sort of came in from the BSA. First of all, there are two programs that are coming up, both focusing on existing buildings and things that have been done and can be done. Each one is a series of several meetings, as you can see from the architects.org website. You can get more information. The Matter and Opinion one does offer CE credit, and the pricing kind of varies by whether it's by individual session or packages. And you can see they're almost project case studies, project presentations, and then the other reopenings are also a series of presentations. That one happens to be free. So check out the BSA website for that. And then I just got this would be of interest, I guess, plug for the National Trust for Historic Preservation is looking for a senior director of preservation architecture. That is the Graham Gund architect endowed position. If one has about 8 years or more experience in the field and willing to, when things normalize again, to move to Washington, D.C., it looks like a great job managing projects at the 20, however many of those, 28 different sites, 28 National Trust historic sites, most of which are National Historic Landmarks. Really looks good. Pays well too. So, moving right along. So there was, this tragic collapse in Miami sort of spurred a recent article in the Globe about hidden problems in the John Hancock's history. So it's that collapse was a kind of a reminder of the risk that had existed on the Boston skyline with the John Hancock. Probably most of all of us remember or know of the infamous windows falling out of the John Hancock in January 1973, where that started. And then that led to investigation of the building, and many people also know about the other issue that was resolved, which was the building twisting and swaying as much as like 3 feet or more at the top. And so they introduced partway up this tuned mass damper that slides from one end to the other, sort of on greased floor that compensates for the swing. But what fewer people know was that the building itself was considered at risk of actually tipping over. So not well publicized, although I think it was covered in one of Robert Campbell's pieces in the 1990s, and then there was other reporting in about 15 years ago in the Globe. And what they found in the analysis, and not to mention the foundation issues during construction that affected the Trinity Church and other buildings too, with the sidewalls collapsing during excavation. But what they found was that the building could, in particular conditions, could actually tip on the short side, not the long side of all things. Anyway, so that was all just happened that there was space next to the cores on part of the building where they could provide reinforcement and stiffen the building all the way up. So just wanted to share this other discovery that WBUR has a series, a series of pieces called Earthwise. And they've linked in some of the stories talking about stormwater and in particular sea level rise. And there are links to some wonderful maps like this one from the Leventhal Map and Education Center at the DPL. Some pictures of the sewer conduit construction. I really love this map, and I don't know the date of it, but you can see in red it's showing the sewer and outfalls, including going through at sort of the bottom, the calf pasture pumping station, which they're still is still there and still looking for a new life. It's last I've heard, but it's a wonderful Richardsonian Romanesque building. And then on the left side, looking at the back bay, and there still is the sort of the back bay inlet there, which I found interesting that it didn't list Massachusetts Avenue. It called it Chester, going into, Chester Square, but there's no bridge, Mass Ave bridge that is shown on this map. The other, of course, really great thing about it is that it shows the original shaded there in that sort of light brown, showing the original peninsula and all the landfill. Benjamin Franklin Institute, Institute of Technology. So there was a piece in the Globe calling it a win-win city project that's stuck in neutral. I will say that the piece by Rachel Cohen does really take to task the neighbors and also the South End District Landmark District Commission for putting the brakes on the project, and it's then saying there's nothing happening with the acting mayor, who has not yet sort of stepped up and just put the screws on it. But the issue is height. It's been raised as the height. It's a proposed mixed-use development. It's win-win because Ben Franklin, the Institute, sells the building and then moves to a new facility in Nubian Square. And then the block, it's redeveloped that preserves the building, but also introduces new construction, some housing and some other uses, and some open space is promised as well. But and the height would actually be similar to across the street, basically, one of the existing residential tower kind of buildings. So it's kind of stuck. We'll wait to see what happens. But the commission has, as of when a couple of weeks ago from this article, there hadn't been any approval from the commission. So we'll see what happens, but hopefully it'll move forward and it'll preserve the building and incorporate it into a sensitive new development. The rope walk in Charlestown Navy Yard is nearing. It's just almost ready, I guess, to open up, and with ribbon cutting. For decades, one of the most challenging buildings to redevelop, being over a quarter-mile long and in some areas just 40 feet wide, linear. How to sensitively preserve and reuse this building, which, as far as I'm concerned, is unique on the planet. This is really the only granite rope walk that's sort of known and significant for not only for the state-of-the-art machinery that was used after it was constructed in the 1834 to 38 or so, but also because for years and years, for much or most of the history of the Navy Yard, this was where all of the United States Navy, their rope was made. There were, as now, there were sort of private industry was interested in doing some of that, and it would go back and forth. Anyway, just showing some of the marketing pictures from the units, how they've managed to insert, so in this case, some duplex units, and there are also some flats. Lower floor with this infinite corridor, you might say, on one end to get access to all the units without cutting every other window into a door, which would have been tragic. So I was reporting then on the new, the Federal Reserve Bank reopened the Langham Hotel. As people know, in Post Office Square, it was the 1922, the Federal Reserve Bank. 1981 or so, it was taken over, but became the Meridian Hotel, and then it became a Langham in 2003. A lot of the what was there of interior finishes have been covered up and or neglected, decorative and interior finishes. So I thought it was of note just because they have really made an effort. I haven't been in it, but just seeing from the pictures and stories for uncovering and restoring some of the finishes you can see here in the ceiling, some of the artwork. Of course, they've introduced furniture that they think that's compatible with the style. And then also you can see the seal here was uncovered and needed some repair of the Federal Reserve. So the only downside is I read that the chocolate bar is not coming back. The famous chocolate fountain or whatever they used to have. And then there was also a story about the Boston's iconic triple deckers with an article that they're an affordable solution to the housing crunch. You know, that's sort of a dog bite man gets all sort of self-evident, I think, to a lot of us, but it's great that it's staying in the public realm, I guess, the discussions about how the 3-deckers, triple deckers show how as it served the immigrant communities then, the multifamily or the same family living in different units, and how a lot of them, some were converted to expensive condominiums, but there's still this housing stock, and then there's still this building type that can also be reinterpreted. So I know the BSA and others are have a number of programs, and I guess charrettes and stuff talking about infill. Really looking at triple deckers as a solution, and related to that is, I guess, proposed zoning reform that would allow for more of those. Moving out to Concord, West Concord. Billy Crosby is a sign painter, been in that field for decades with his own business, and he had, when he would be called upon to create a new sign, then he would stow away the old ones, I guess, in his basement, and realized at a certain point, here was this great collection that was a resource, historical resource for the community. And so one thing led to another, and then set up the Concord Sign Museum, which is located in the Bradford Mill in West Concord. Just to show this array of all the businesses, many of which are long gone. I love the story, and I wrote about the story how he kind of grew up in a family business. I guess was auto repair or auto detailing or something, and he had an assignment which was to replace the lettering on the side of a vehicle or something, and he found that he was much more interested in that part, creating the signs rather than the other auto repair. So anyway, I love signs. This group we had a little while back, we featured someone that traveled the city and documented painted signs, some of ghost signs and others on buildings, and so that's why it stood out to me. Moving to Washington, D.C., the Capitol building, people have probably seen the House voted to remove a number of Confederate statues, including Roger Taney and Jefferson Davis and others from the chambers within the Capitol. Tuskegee University, an architecture professor, is leveraging historic preservation goals to meet community goals. This is a one of the Armstrong School and the Rosenwald schools that were built as sort of in partnership with, I just forgot his name, from Sears and Roebuck. Julius Rosenwald, and the founder of the university, Booker T. Washington. They worked together. But anyway, this one of the buildings that's worthy of preservation, and the professor developed some programs for young people for architecture students to participate and learn skills like in window restoration, learning about bricks and mortar. The master class was set up with Mason. And they discovered, looking at some, the course of that work, looking at some of the bricks and seeing that their fingerprints were literally fingerprints in some of the bricks, really, activating and celebrating the community's history. So public workshops, this project-based learning. So it's a wonderful program. And the students, meanwhile, then they learned about construction documents, measure drawings, landmark nominations, creating the stabilization plan, and developing guidelines. So kudos to the Professor Kwesi Daniels, Assistant Professor of Architecture at Tuskegee. Lighter note here, the so-called Flintstone House. It's a single-family residence, free-form residence in Hillsborough, California. And it was built in the 1970s. Actually, it was all sort of off-white, and colors were added later. But sort of a fun story, kind of pitting the homeowner who introduced the dinosaur, all these sculptures in the yard against the town in terms of whether that can and should be regulated. So it was settled. So the good news, it was settled. And in fact, the owner got a little bit of settlement money, but the house had been designed by architect William Nicholson in 1976. It was an experimental domed building constructed by Spring shotcrete onto steel rebar and wire mesh frames over inflated aeronautical balloons. So there you go. Moving to the Netherlands. The Rembrandt's Night Watch painting has been restored using artificial intelligence, and restored in the sense that it was, it had been strips 2 feet on the left side, and then little bits of the top on the other side had actually been cut off in order to get it through a doorway. In 1642 painting, it was trimmed in 1715. And so for this recent restoration, they used, so they had just the painting, the trimmed painting, but the pieces were long gone. But another painter had made a copy, sitting in a particular one place on one side, made a copy of the painting. And so they, using that, and then also through AI, analyzing just the Rembrandt techniques with the brush strokes and the way he handled the colors and the brush strokes. So they kind of improved on and corrected the parallax from the other painter being at one side. Garrett London's was the who had made this painted copy that's in the London National Gallery. And then they kind of have recreated it. So it's on display this way, on display for a while, I guess for a few months, with the added scenes there. And so they found, in particular, the left side, you can see there are two boys who are looking over the view, over the scene there. And it recenters the composition. So that was also discussed, and that the two men who were kind of central in the middle, more like in the middle before, are now off center as part of the composition. So anyway, and while that work was done, they put up a picture of our cat. No, just kidding. just wanted to make sure you guys are awake out there. Okay. So, now I can get up and stretch. Now it's time for our feature presentation from Carl J. and David Riccio, Summit Design Construction, and John Canning and Company Limited. We're two, let me just say, two giants in their field, different disciplines, but collaboration, work together on projects that are most significant and iconic, among the most significant and iconic structures in the country, known internationally. I will just say a couple of words of introduction and then hand it over to them. But full disclosure, other than my wife and one of our cats, the first thing that I see when I open my eyes every morning is generally this beautiful John Canning sky mural that was created by Johann Biermann at John Canning, and which we were very fortunate to score at a Boston Preservation Alliance, another charity auction. So I am not an unbiased, I'm a fan of John Canning and Company. I'm just going to, as I stop the share here. As probably everyone knows, John Canning Company specializes in finishes, including plaster restoration, decorative finishes, gilding, historic woodwork, stone murals, and more. And then they also provide both companies provide services from planning and pre-design through investigation, implementation, and beyond. And certainly part of the planning and design services are part of what John Canning and Company does, and which I think they'll talk about in terms of the current case studies at MIT. David is a principal and president of John Canning and Company. Has been a leader of the team for over 20 years. And personally, and himself, he's an industry recognized expert on historic flat and decorative plaster, as well as decorative painting techniques in gilding and glazing. Carl J. is the director of historic preservation at Summit Design and Construction, a $1.5 billion, 100% employee-owned national company, construction management firm with offices in Boston, with Springfield, and across the country, and with over, if you don't mind my saying, 45 years of experience in the construction industry. Carl's one of the nation's most well-respected preservation experts. Has contributed to many industry conferences. I won't go through those, but lectured, is on a number of boards, and award-winning projects under his belt. So take it away. Welcome. Thanks so much, Carl and David.
Thank you.
Should be able to share the screen when you're ready.
I will do that. Here we go. Hopefully you see a screen with MIT Building 10 on the front. Is that there?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for having us. We really appreciate the opportunity to present the MIT project to you today. And Jack, thank you very much for the plug on the mural of your bedroom ceiling. But as you mentioned, Jack, Carl J. is with me today, and I couldn't do this presentation without him, honestly. Carl is a tremendous partner that we work with in Summit Design and Construction. We work with them quite a bit in and around the Massachusetts area, as well as at Yale University. And they seem to be at the heart of many of these types of projects, and of course at MIT. So I think it's important that Carl gives the design assist aspect of the project, which was integral to the whole success of it. So Carl is going to play a major role in this presentation today. But I'm going to try and keep this brief and kind of jump into this because we have a lot of ground to cover, if you will, and we talked about various components of the work, and I'm going to kind of jump into that now. Let's see here, if I can. Of course, we have to show our continuing education information. so you could get your CES credits, and the course numbers at the bottom of this sheet.
David, we still don't have the screen.
Okay, sorry. What is going on here? What do you see?
People.
Oh, maybe I'm showing the wrong screen. Mhm. Let's screen one. Okay, let's try that. Is that good?
There we
Yes,
Okay, how about
go.
perfect.
Perfect.
now? I am not.
Got it.
Do you see that?
Yes.
Oh, okay, great. I apologize. I had to switch screens there. Okay, so you have that the course number at the bottom, and the course description, which we're going to provide overall overview of some of the design assist services that Carl will get into, and treatment techniques, which I will cover with restoration and renovation of Building 10 at MIT, of course. We will take a look at a few restoration projects, including Barker Rotunda at MIT and how they relate. We explore historic architectural finishes, pre-construction services, investigation, and restoration options that were, I think, really intriguing in this project. Some of the learning points, material selection and construction, which Carl is going to cover with the lay light, sound, and some other nice points. And I'll get into the historic finishes, investigation, restoration, color palette, which was very subtle but very important in this space and the other spaces around it. And of course, design assist services. So I'm going to turn it over to Carl, but I will also carry on with the slides for you, Carl.
Well, I guess I should mention that we are recording the session, just so that matters to anyone.
Great. Thank you, Jack and David. Yeah, so the project here, the Building 10 at MIT, it's the Barker Engineering Library, kind of really at the center of the main group, or you'd say the intersection of the infinite corridor, if there's such a thing. But the idea of it being the engineering library presented one of the challenges that we had, that in 1942, the Great Dome was actually closed over. So the oculus was sealed so that it wasn't a target for bombers during World War II. So it sort of presented one of the challenges we had of getting the room back to where it wanted to be. Next slide. Gives you an idea here of the building, Building 10 with the dome at the top. Again, we had that's great, David. Yep. Next slide, please. We had a great team, incredibly large team. I'd have to mention Gary Tondorf-Dick and Joe Collins from MIT, Ben Markham from Ascentech, Peter Babayan from Simpson Comforts and Hager, and Jeff Sladen from Sladen Feinstein. They were all integral to this project, and they had incredible teams behind it. Next slide. Today's agenda will look real quickly at some historical reflections, the renovation itself. Very, very briefly, we'll touch on the light and the sound components of the restoration. Then David will go through more what today's presentation is about in the restoration. I'll go through some of the design and constructability issues. And then if we have time left, we'll open it up for questions. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So for historical reflections, MIT, luckily, next slide, has an incredible archive. So you can see here from this cross-section, the Barker Library occupies the 6th and 7th floors of Building 10. This is where our major restoration project was, including the oculus, at the very top. Next slide, please. Again, some great photos of, historical photos of the building under construction, 1916. Next slide. Closing in with the, gorgeous Indiana limestone. Incredible. Next slide. An idea here of the masons, wearing their finery, doing this type of construction with the fluted columns. Again, solid limestone columns. Working with there at the, at the front of the Barker, at Building 10. Next slide. So again, looking from the top, near the top of the dome, looking down into the original library itself, this was the configuration that was new. Again, it sort of presented the first line of lighting where they had desk lamps. Next slide, and the layout. You can see here that this was really the first method of lighting and using the library itself. You get an idea here of some of the, some of the original finishes that David will get into, quite well. Next slide. Signature renovation. Next slide. So Bosworth was the original architect for all of the main group. He had a premise. Now this premise, next slide, was really for the entire main group. Important to understand. His design was really the elegant warehouse. Again, drawing from industrial architecture. We saw that even with the window restoration, the window replacements as well. Important of a flood of window light. This was important for the entire complex. A flood of fresh air. Interesting with the windows, they were a balanced double hung window that you open the bottom and it automatically opens the top sash as well. And again, an avoidance of lost motion. Again, the idea of the infinite corridor, and then the psychology of student life. What works best for for the students. Next slide. So we have to remember too that Building 10 is very famous for the MIT hacks. Next slide. And this sort of came into our design work as well. That there's been many times when the students will introduce things. This is the police car on the top of the dome, installed overnight. Again, on top of the oculus. So again, it's important to keep in mind with when we get into our structural engineering that we have to do with this opportunity for the students. Next slide. We weren't really, we got hacked as well. This is our scaffolding and our hacky roof system enclosure while we were doing the replacement of the oculus. So they set up Pac-Man. What you don't see in this photograph here, which was incredible, they took the construction lights and actually had them strung out in a straight line, so they were being eaten by Pac-Man. So it was a really innovative hack. Now again, signs went up that the students would be expelled if they were caught on the roof. I don't know if that's fully enforced, but we had to be careful that there wasn't liability issues or anything like that in our work environment. Next slide, please. So heart of the matter, light and sound. Talk briefly on this. The engineers had incredible presentations, but we'll just go over briefly what this means. Next slide, please. So how could a magnificent vaulted ceiling designed for daylight reading room meet the needs of today's 24/7 students? The answer had been attempted 3 times over the past century. Each intervention had been a failure. Next slide, please. Square tiles in a round hole. This will give you sort of an overview of what the finished skylight or the finished oculus was that we actually created. This is sort of with that in place. Gives you an idea of the 1,200 plus tile and the stainless steel option that we went with. We'll talk a little bit about what was original and what we opted to go with in the new version of the Oculus. Next slide, please. So researching the lens of the eye, again, important with the light. Next slide. And again, MIT is great for research, even though we have a very tight time frame for completing this work. So you can see here that stainless steel skylight was in place. And then there was again, during the course of the project, we were trying to determine what the translucent nature was of the glass in the original lay light. When we started the work, the lay light glass was gone. You see here on top of the step ladder or step ladders, a window that had original glass in it that was in one of the corridors. So we were trying to match that obscure nature of that glass and meet code, which if you look at the next slide, we had to actually go with, well, actually, I'm sorry, the mystery of the amethyst. This came in. We'll get the other one next. This is one that Gary in particular was quite interested in. But so the original tile had turned purple, or this beautiful amethyst color. And again, with the research labs at MIT, it was pretty easy to break down the glass and figure out that what there was manganese in the glass, and this is what turns purple in glass. You see it in, King's Chapel, you see it in their parish house, you see it in antique bottles. A lot of times it was older glass than glass from the 1914 to 1916, but it was being introduced into glass to, maintain clarity of the glass, try to eliminate the green color. But so we had to make a decision, what would we go back with? We'll get into that a little bit further, but we ended up opting for clear glass. We didn't want to put back something that would change. We could have done that easily, with the way we created the glass, but we didn't know when that would stop, with the UV light. Next slide. Light. Next slide, please. So this was sort of one of the 60s or 70s attempts at, like the spaceship model of lighting for the library. Again, probably fitting for, for the day, but not really successful with the beauty of the library in the dome. But did provide foot candles that are needed. And then one of the other, great, David, next slide, please. Then one of the ones that we arrived with were these street lamps. You can see them, on the bottom side. The next slide will show them more clear, but you can actually see here sort of the whited out dome, the closed in ley light, and really lacking light that's needed, both for beauty in the space and for the student experience. Next slide, please. You get an idea here of that, that lighting, and our challenge really was to, provide lighting that was going to do all of that I mentioned, provide, highlight the beauty of the dome, highlight, the walls, and then provide lighting for the student experience. So, next slide. So, Sladen Feinstein got involved with light simulation. Take a look at the next slide. And with the use of downlights, a couple of rings of canned downlights and uplighting, we were able to create, this effect. They did a lot of this in their lab, and the MIT client was able to review this and understand what they were going to be getting in. We had a whole host of dimmers and settings for different occupancies of the space. It wasn't just the library; it was for other things as well. Next slide, please. Just gives you an idea here of that lighting and the benefit of having a model to work with. Now we did do true mock-ups. We got downlights that we installed, and we got cove lighting that was in the for uplighting and things like that we installed as well. So it was kind of both. But again, during the course of the project, which we'll get into a little bit further. Next slide, please. This gives you an idea here of the color rendition, again, the hot spots, and getting an understanding of how that light would really impact David's work, which is to come. And then there's an idea, first shot of the, you can see with the renewed oculus and ley light, and then the lights at the very top, how that's, illuminating the dome, as well as, cove lighting just behind that ledge as well. And then an idea here of the down lighting that highlighted the columns in the room and the colors and all as well. Next slide. Another shot of the same. So sound, existing conditions, sound masking, simulation, and next step sounds for events.
I think we lost Carl.
Yeah, he dropped off the window, so.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
Oh, Thank you.
Great, thank you. So actually, it's just sort of fitting. But the existing conditions that were unique to a dome, we had the whisper gallery. So in other words, if you were to enter the library and just walking or very, very quiet talk, it could be heard very clearly on the opposite side of the dome. So we were challenged with this effect of the whisper gallery and, you know, the need for quiet. So this was our big challenge on sound. Ascentech has an incredible studio where they actually, in the studio with everyone there, they reproduce the sounds, all these different sounds, and introduce different levels of sound masking to help with that problem. They had the footsteps, they had talking, they had the use for, say, a small party, and then even at the end, they had like an ensemble playing. So they had sound masking developed that would take care of, you know, to the most part, all of these situations. Next slide. So in other words, we did introduce sound masking, and again, it had the ability of being adjusted for different use of the building. Again, all hidden behind the cove. You know, very nicely done and very effective. But again, the idea of using, you know, the room, it was incredible. Next slide, please. So this next step, sound for events. Again, they're still planning, you know, how to get this even better. You know, they have roll-in equipment now, and they're even looking at how to outfit the, you know, the area for events like that. So with that, I think we're going to move into your portion, David.
Great, thank you. One of the things we worked on as well with Carl in the sound masking was in the coffers. The central portion of the coffers all have sound masking that were color matched the fabric to the color palette that we ultimately installed, investigated, and found those colors. So all the various partners had to work together, obviously, to get to something aesthetically pleasing as well as, of course, functional with the sound. So.
Thank you, David.
So, as Jack mentioned earlier, we have, along with Carl and Shama, have been fortunate to work at MIT over the years. We have conserved and restored historic architectural finishes in the rotunda at Building 7, also with Shama, on Mass Ave, and the Grand Lobby, as it's called, in Building 10, which is at the main level. And it's they're both designed, of course, by Bosworth. And that's a really important point for us in terms of how we look at materials and finishes. So when we're looking at Building 10, the lobby, we look at the Building 10 lobby as and the main floor as the access point ultimately to Barker Library Rotunda up on the upper floor. So there's a direct architectural relationship, materials relationship, and of course, aesthetic. And so we had to really look at both areas, and both areas were restored separately, but they both were restored. And we look at both of these, and we'll share that with you here, the relationship and their connection aesthetically. Here's the Building 10 lobby. We know that color has a psychological and emotional impact on those inhabiting these spaces. And I would like to say that Bosworth, he totally appreciated the supporting role color would have played in these rooms. He had eloquently expressed these relationships in the interiors and the selection of materials. For example, in the lobby, he has travertine, marble, Tennessee marble floor, a use of variegated bronze chandeliers, and of course the paint coatings. This building, Building 10 lobby, restored probably the year before we did the rotunda. We also, as we mentioned, we worked in Building 10 with Carl and his team. But as decorators, when we examine and looking at restoring finishes, we understand, and I'd like to think we understood the theme of color and relationship of the architecture that Bosworth was trying to achieve. The ceiling here at Building 7 the rotunda ceiling there, it's like a lime wash, and it has that feel, that appearance of carved limestone, and it's a very peculiar finish. It's really matte and dry, like a distemper paint. And then of course you have the buff stone and the railings that are cast metal, but have a finish to simulate a verdigris bronze. So it's actually a paint coating. I'm gonna get a lot into that in a moment. But when it comes to the rotunda project, to determine the specific colors of the Barker rotunda, we prepared a paint study of the original finishes. The paint study would ultimately provide information on the specific colors, their placement, of course, and the paint material composition, which is always important for us as decorator to understand what kind of paints were used, what we're doing. Are we going to put back compatible materials? Will they be durable, and so forth? So, and reversible from a preservation point of view. So the study included the review of available archives, which Carl touched on earlier. The microscopic analysis of paint coatings and layering. We prepared paint exposures, or reveals, sometimes they're called, by peeling back layers of overpaint to reveal the original paint and maybe treatments and how those paints were applied. We compiled and interpreted the analysis and field findings into a report that ultimately was the driver for color selection for our materials, as well as the lighting, as well as the fabric for the masking of the sound. Here I am extracting small paint samples for the testing, and at this point you can see this, they put Sherw put up this incredible scaffolding tower that brought us all the way up to the Oculus, and kind of having to hang out over the scaffolding to get my samples, which was not fun, frankly. So, but nonetheless, we got those samples. Here's another really good example of how we extract our samples, where we literally take scalpels and we extract samples and we catalog them. They're individually prepared and brought into our lab. And when we're extracting these samples, we take a small section of the substrate. You can see here the substrate is wood in this case. This allows us to evaluate the sample from the substrate up. So we get right from the pure wood and to all the paint layers that subsequently are applied. And we can look at every layer in high magnification. I'll get into that here. And just more examples of our paint our paint sampling extractions at the Oculus. And then when we get into the actual lab work, each sample is examined under high power magnification. In this case, we're using 100 times magnification, and we're using UV light as well to determine the color, the paint binder, the number of paint coatings, layers, if you will, and dirt layers. So when we look at binder, we're obviously looking for, in this period, it was an oil paint, but we look for the various types of binders through this analysis, whether it's a casein paint, latex, early latex, oils, so on and so forth. And we really, understanding that helps us to determine what type of paints to put on for restoration. In the image to the right, you can see the paint stratigraphy under high magnification right here. I don't know if you can see this really fine dark layer right there. Hopefully you can. That there is dirt. So from an analytical point of view, we see our plaster substrate here at the very lowest, so that's our substrate. And then a little bit of a sizing material, like a shellac or animal skin glue, hide glue, that's a preparatory, and then paint layers. Here is a paint layer, and then another paint layer. And then we see this kind of dark line, and that is dirt and dust accumulating over a great period of time, enough so that it can be seen in a microscope setting. And then, of course, when you see that dirt layer, it's been there. And the subsequent layers on top of it, like here, this pale gray, that tells us that's the start of a new campaign. So we know that dirt line indicates the original or early campaign, and then above it is the subsequent paint campaigns. So that really helps. That just indicates where we're trying to go. In the field, we revealed original finishes using solvents and the scalpels again. This allowed us to see the finishes firsthand and determine the manner in which they were installed. You can see that here. We can see these kind of buff colors coming through. The earlier gray color, or the later gray color that we saw in the mic through the lab analysis, and then we're getting into lower colors beneath that. I think this is a really interesting paint exposure that we did here on the right. And you can see here that that's the original color, and then it was painted over with grays right here. And then at that time, the current off-white color. So the room had only been painted over 2 or 3 times from our analysis. But what I'd like to really share with you here is in this exposure, you can see there's a texture on the bead and reel motif that's from the coffer. And that tells us that the original paint was applied, it was an oil paint, it was applied by hand, by brush. And those old-fashioned oil paints stayed open, if you will, or pliable for hours. Even overnight, you could literally come back to it and kind of manipulate it. And so the painter would apply the brush, the material, and then stipple it. They would use a block stippler, which was a white china bristle, thick brush, maybe 10 inches wide, long by 4 inches wide. We still use them, frankly, and it's a real workout. But the wet paint is punched with these block stipplers, and it creates this little stipple effect. And so, well, why did they do that? There's basically 2 premises or 2 reasons why they would do this. First one is to create a subtle texture. But more importantly, and more likely, during this period, getting oil paints with various sheen levels was not as readily available like today, where we could just go to Sherw-Williams and order pretty much any sheen level we want. Matte, eggshell, satin, this, that, and the other thing. There's just, it goes on and on. So to control the paint, painters back then would do one of a few things. They would either add things like wax or whitening to the paint, and it would dull the oils in the paint coating. But more likely, they would just take the gloss or semi-gloss paint, apply it, and then stipple it, and that would diffuse or allow the light to refract and disperse, so it didn't create the illusion of a high sheen. So that was the technique used here, was really to dull down the sheen through manipulating the paint. The study informed us that the original paint scheme was somewhat of a monochromatic palette in cream tones, buffs, with a faux bronze variegated decorative paint at the grills. You got to stick with me on that one. So the grills are cast metal, and then they were faux finished to have this wonderful green, deep green bronze kind of variegated look. And we saw that also in lobby 10. And I think it's a subtle aspect to the work, but really quite nice. So, and so let's see, I lost my notes here. Well, I think I have it. I think I've covered it for you, but you can see the terrazzo floor as an example, and then the marble base and border, which has that wonderful Botticino kind of buff colors, and the paint palette really reflects that. To the right, we were comparing the paint colors with the floor and the base, as I showed here previously. These colors comprise of the monochromatic scheme. So now we're trying to play with the colors. We started with stock colors from Sherw-Williams and Benjamin Moore, and then ultimately we started mixing and tweaking colors and customizing the colors so they're really spot on to the historic. Once we did all that, we prepared a rendering of the library space with the color palette and the placement of those colors as an idea to express what the space would look like once again, and also for placement of colors when the work was going to be performed. And we did that similarly. We did this in the grand lobby, and the colors are closely related. They're near identical, subtle variations, but near identical. So now we're in the lobby 10 space, looking up at the ceiling, and this is prior to our restoration. And I'm focusing out here on the chandelier, which is a cast variegated bronze. It's actually a bronze fixture, and it has that wonderful green and deep bronze kind of look to it. But the ceiling is kind of just this off-white. And looking at that chandelier, it kind of gives you the illusion that the chandelier is just floating in the space. It doesn't really feel like it's connected to the architecture. So it's kind of lost its effect. It's just sticking out there, almost like a sore thumb. So in the grand lobby, the paint color palette of the upper walls and ceilings, which are plaster, reflects the stone and marble below. And the marble I mentioned earlier was travertine. The painted faux bronze variegated treatment at the railings, upper right, at the second floor, loggia level, and at the door casings that you can see here to the left, and the railings match the chandelier. So those are all cast metal and then variegated finished to relate to the chandelier. And then at the ceiling, they have these wonderful rosettes, which were initially painted with this deep bronze color. And we painted, found the color, got it, and then created this glazing effect that simulated the chandelier. And then here's our work. Actually, we still have our wet paint signs, and the work is under progress. And you can see here, you'll start seeing this relationship here of the wall panels and the columns and the ceiling and how they relate to the library once we get back into that space. Something similar in building 7, as we mentioned with Carl, working with Carl, the exterior side of the door casings and the interior side all have that faux variegated painted treatment, including at the rails. Now I'm coming back into the library project specifically, and you can see here we have a large scale mock-up, and those colors are starting to play again, as was in the lobby and in the loggia. And of course, you see the variegated green finish now on the grills. And those were vent grills, if my memory serves me right, and Carl could correct me here, but they were vent grills. One of the challenges we faced, and Carl mentioned it, we tried to do our mock-ups in a space that didn't have the proper lighting, and of course scaffolding going on, and shadows and so forth. So Carl and his team set up mock-up lights for us. So when we were evaluating in color mixing and matching, that was critical to us because we couldn't get the colors right until we had that mock-up of lights in place. Our colors are looking very strange, and but that was really critical. And I would say for any project where you're getting into historic colors going forward, if you don't already, try to have your painting contractor or consultant mock up their colors with the appropriate lighting temperature at least. Just as a side fact here, we end up using Sherw-Williams Emerald paint, which is one of their high-end products, and it was fantastic. It had the right sheen and texture for us. If another product I would use if we were going to do this project maybe today, I would contemplate using Kime and their potassium silicate paints, which even give a better effect of masonry finish, as this is intended to be. But either option would be fine. So let me get into the grills, and you can see on the image to the left, there's the blank panels, and then towards the right of that same image, you have the grill. And so that had all been covered over, and then we have a detail of the grill to the right, cast grill. So here we're showing an example on the right of our faux finish to simulate it, that variegated finish that we found also in the lobby. For the blank panels, and how we created that, blank panels, we use stencils and colored glazes. But the first thing we did in the panel was we painted it kind of a deep bronze color and then applied this greenish glaze, scumbled it onto the surface in a uniform way, and then made these stencils out of mylar or acetate and applied them, put them on, and then applied a black color, and then continued the illusion into the next steps. And once we got them on, we started to put in a kind of a faux effect over the black just to obscure the black a little bit. And then here I am on the left. I'm literally striping in joints that would mimic the three-dimensional ones. So we're just kind of continuing that illusion. And here it is. Now, colors are in, the final effect, how they relate to that lobby 10, those lobby 10 shots, and the grills up in this area here. This grill here in the center is an actual three-dimensional grill with a vent, and then these here are to the right and left flanking it are the faux effect ones. Now, I'm going to turn it back over to Carl here in one moment, but I would like to share our studio's philosophy for color and decoration, if you don't mind. And I believe it really applies to what Bosworth was doing, and he probably had, whether it was expressed or not directly, but I'm sure it was the same philosophy in terms of his design, as well as architects that we seem to work with in their practice today. And it's a quote that we kind of adhere to as a studio. And the quote is, it's actually a proposition. Owen Jones is a 19th century colorist and designer. And he wrote these propositions about decoration and how they support architecture. They're sort of like the 10 commandments, if you will, of being a decorative painter. And we kind of live and die by proposition number one as a studio. And if you know John Canning, which I'm sure many of you probably know, he kind of, if you will, kindly say, he beats that into us. And as a young man coming into the studio, that's the first thing he gave me on day one when I joined the studio. He gave me Owen Jones's propositions and told me to sit down and read them. And then at the end of the day, we would talk about them. And so that's how I started my career with this studio. So it kind of tells you where John is at and what our studio is thinking about. But proposition number one, as it's written here, the decorative arts arise from and should properly be attended upon architecture. So what we do has to support the architecture, embellish it, but not overtake it. And when we do it well, we do it correctly, we'd like to think that our work, or the work that preceded us and that we're restoring, is in a state of repose. And if we can get that state of repose, we've achieved something better than the individual parts. So, Carl, I pass it to you.
Great, thank you, David. I'll try to go through 6 months of construction fairly quickly to maintain schedule here. So next slide, please. Next. So just to give you an idea of the project timeline, again, they were, research and development on the project for 4 years, 07 to 011. Project kickoff, bidding, construction management. So we were brought on board in April. The design was completed in June. We began construction in July with the initial completion date of December. So they only wanted to close the library for 6 months. Final completion date of February. Naturally, where we were doing so well, they added 2 or 3 additional projects to our project while we were there. So next slide, please. So the main project really was to replace the existing glass block skylight, a new structural frame, the new glass blocks, refurbish the existing lay light, and provide a new aluminum frame skylight over above. So here's what, when we opened up the covering, this is an idea of what we found. Next slide, please. Again, this is with all the covering taking off. And again, another one of the challenges is you can see that over the years, even before the closing of the, the skylight in 1942, there was a problem trying to replace tile. Next slide. The reason being, it was in a concrete frame. These are the Luxfer glass tile, a very thin 2-inch concrete frame. Next slide. This is an idea of looking inside at the lay light. You can see that the obscure glass was gone. They had acoustic panels, held down with sawzall blades, whatever they could get their hands on. So it lost, all of this effect. So these are details of the existing concrete frame. Good, David. Next slide. That we found. So next slide. So again, to keep in mind that they had the hacks, and we, had some pretty hefty loading requirements to make it safe for the, for the future. Next slide. So we looked at actually a couple of options. We looked at redoing the concrete skylight frame, as it was. Now, there was a tremendous job of formwork. It's actually a lens, so that it rises up about 4 inches in the center. There's a 1/4 inch to the foot pitch from the center out, and it's on the radial. And we really had a problem getting a concrete contractor, even though we talked to the finest in the area, to be able to do this level of concrete and maintain quality control. So next slide, please. We actually looked at this option of doing it in stainless steel with a brushed, satin finish. So we ended up going with the stainless steel frame. It turned out that it was quite a bit less expensive. We could actually do the work. We didn't have that sub-framing job to do. So there was a lot of win-wins, and it actually allowed us the opportunity to reglaze the tile in the future because we were going with structural sealant for the tile. Next slide. This is an idea here of a mock-up. Again, mock-ups are so important. It gives you an idea of what we were looking at. We were trying to shake out any problems. And this is actually with the old tile that was salvaged. You can see the amethyst color. But, you know, DeAngelis Ironworks did the stainless steel work for us. Incredible work. Next slide. Again, some details you can look at. You can see that with the welding, you know, you've got cleanup to do. Again, this is the mock-up as well. You really look at everything that might need work. Next slide. Now, this is an idea here of the frame in place. We ended up putting it in 4 sections. It was about a 28-foot diameter oculus. So we ended up, you know, doing field welding of the 4 sections together, but all the other welding completed in the shop. Next slide. In finishing. Gives you an idea here of that field welding. Again, as you probably know, stainless steel welding takes a special welder to do that type of work. And again, we were getting into the, you know, the late fall months. So you get an idea of the protection that we took for this. Next slide. Again, the amethyst colored tile. Again, during the course of the design work, there still wasn't a decision on what we were going with. Next slide. Again, these are the tile, how they'll set in the frame. We talked about that. Next slide. This is an idea here. So we ended up going with clear. The decision was made that Bosworth's original intention would have been clear. And you can see here, if you look at the next slide, that the tile are actually prismatic. They provide about a 15% additional light with that interior formwork that we had there. There was actually, we had to go to 3 different companies to have the tile made. There was a company that actually made the form, the cast iron forms. We had a company that made the actual mix for the glass, and then we had another company that actually did the production run of the glass block. Again, 1,200 block plus. Next slide. Again, just fitting, you know, with setting tape, setting blocks. Next slide. An idea here of the, you know, the block being set in the actual frame before silicone glazing. Next slide. Here's the structural silicone glazing, and they glaze them in alternating patterns. It helped the glazers, you know, perfect their work. So they alternated and then came back when that glazing was cured and did the rest of the glazing. Next slide. An idea here, we had SGH with their famous test rack. Again, we tested every bit of this skylight because over the years it had, or the oculus had leaked. We did find a couple of pinhole leaks that we show on the right there that we had to tweak a bit of the welding and a bit of the silicone glazing. But again, we developed a waterproof oculus before we completed that work. You can see, get a little idea here too of our enclosure that we had for doing this work up on top of the dome. Next slide. Again, there's the finished stainless steel skylight, and really the finish is such that it looks quite like the limestone. That's a new limestone ring we had around the perimeter, and with that satin finish, directional, it worked quite nicely with the limestone. Wow. Next slide. Then our next challenge was we actually went belt and suspenders in this project, that we actually put on a weathering skylight above the oculus. Next slide. It gives you an idea here of that weathering skylight. Again, we had to go through this with the Cambridge Historical Commission to make sure that it was not really, you know, highly visible from the bridges or anyway, and it was quite successful. So we had to keep the proportions of that down, and again, this was installed with that same camber on that skylight. Next slide. So then the lay light, our considerations on the lay light, it is a return plenum for the air above. We wanted to reduce the potential for condensation, and we had to do the glass support. Next slide, please. So this is an idea. Here is the the existing steel Laylight frame with the glazing tape installed. Next slide. These are the 2 layers I was talking about. By code, we had to go back with laminated glass. So we had a clear Starfire glass as the back glass, and then we had Benheim rib glass, and we made up laminated glass with this, with these 2 different glasses, and incredibly, well done, and it replicated. Now, all the glass had to be ordered to match all those pie-shaped sections. Nothing's easy. So this glass had to come out all pre-cut and, pre-measured in the field. Next slide. It gives you an idea here of that glass going in. As I say, there was all different shapes and sizes. Next slide. So for construction, David talked a little bit about access. This scaffolding here that David was doing is, research work off of the paint was also our, what we call a dance floor for the removal of the existing oculus. Again, everything has to be done with incredible safety. We had to remove that completely and demolish it. And then it was used again for the Laylight work as well as the, work on the oculus. Next slide. There's an idea here of the bridge we had going across to the dome in our full enclosure. Get an idea there of the new limestone ring. We did have a hurricane during the course of the project, so that all that monoflex material had to be taken down during the hurricane and then be reassembled. A little bit of complication. Next slide, please. Gives you an idea there of the new Indiana limestone ring with their, the pinning and all to match the original profiles and anchoring systems. Next slide. There's the man, the welder doing the, the final seaming where we had to put the 4 sections of Skylight together. You can see in addition to the ring, we had to replace like the top course of limestone on the dome itself as well. And then install fall protection. There's rings all around there for fall protection that we had to provide as well. But it gives you an idea of the enclosure. There was some supplemental protection there during the welding in case there was any, water or moisture or anything like that. Next slide. Again, the finished oculus. Next slide, please. The finished oculus plus weathering Skylight. Next slide. The completed oculus lighting, David's work, with the acoustic panels. Next slide. I think we can open it up to any questions.
Well, that's just stunningly beautiful work. While we're waiting, I hope some people will have some questions. I love the look of the Laylight, it looked almost like a radio telescope, one of these, ginormous telescopes they have where they're just ground down to these incredible tolerances.
That's very tight tolerances on the project.
And the cast glass, I was curious to know how many in terms of attic stock. I assume that for all that effort, Gary and MIT wanted some additional glass for future repairs.
We do, Jack. We have both attic stock and they maintain the molds. I think the molds are in the MIT museum, but they do have the molds. Interesting with the molds is they have to be brought up to temperature. It's quite a process, pouring that glass and getting it clear. But they have attic stock and they have the molds.
Well, it seems to me it would also be a great fundraiser too. I mean, as an alum of MIT's high school studies program, I would buy one of those just for my desk. They're just beautiful.
It's a nice tile.
See a question from Ed Edelman saying, was another original planning consideration the idea of flexibility or of internal walls? So I guess that had to do with the reading room, maybe.
They wanted the flexibility of being able to move everything out of it's used for much more than the library. So they've got the flexibility of it being, wide open, and they have a lot of functions. It's all booked out. So there's no real temporary walls installed.
Christopher Haynes was asking, what is the final thermal qualities of the finished roofing? I guess that means from the dome.
Good question. When we developed, there's an air barrier between the oculus, the stainless steel and glass block, and then the skylight itself, the weathering skylight, is insulating glass. So there is an insulating value to the insulating glass and the airspace between the two. So I don't have the exact number, but it does have an insulating quality to it.
Adrian Kelly asks a question for both of you. Looking back on the project, is there anything you would have done differently?
Why don't you take that, David?
No?
Well, on my end, it was great. Okay, David.
Sorry, go ahead. I would say probably not, other than maybe just look at the use of the paint, maybe exploring the idea of the Kime paint that I mentioned, but not with colors, not with techniques and so forth, but maybe looking at a masonry coating like Kime. Their Opto line, which is designed for interior finishes, would be a suitable alternate to the emerald paint. That would be about it, though.
Yeah, I was interested because since the Kime is a whole different animal, I suppose, in that it bonds chemically and different from a paint film.
It is different. However, they're interestingly enough, the Kime products, especially for interior, they have the Opto line. If you prime the surface, whatever the substrate, well, it should be plaster. You can't really use it on wood because it's too brittle. But you can use a 100% acrylic primer. They also have a primer, but they recommend their primer or a 100% acrylic primer, and then you apply the Opto product onto that. And we've done it, and it looks fantastic. And it has that wonderful masonry coating in that kind of stone-like effect to it. And we use it a lot, actually, especially when we're doing simulated ashlar block or ashlar block in churches and things like this. We seem to be using it, even when it's not specified. We're using it a lot in our studio just because of the wonderful appearance it gives and feel when you touch it. It has a little bit of the quartz crystallizing and reflecting light a little bit differently. It's quite nice.
Oh. Good to know. Let's see, David Torria was asking about the acoustical panels within the dome, I guess so within the coffers. He says, you mentioned sound masking, but not the absorption. But I think this question was, he was wondering, is it an architectural solution? Sound masking, was that architectural as opposed to electronic? And I'm assuming that the fabric panels were intended to absorb the sound within the dome.
Correct. They were at each panel, as David had mentioned.
Yeah.
And there were acoustic panels there previously installed. So there were older versions of that, and they took those out. I'm not sure if Carl, you may know that the qualities of those older panels, I don't think were that great. They were basically, if I remember correctly, they were just pieces of a homosote.
Right, and they were painted over, David.
And they were painted over on top of it all. So it was just homosote that was painted. So it lost a little of that. They were proud of the plaster coffer. So there was a little bit of a baffle behind that. And so it did help some, but yeah, being painted over it didn't. Also kind of negated some of that.
Yeah. Not to pick on homosote though, it's a wonderful product for its
It has its
those architectural school pinups. So the sound masking then there was no electronic sound masking involved, right?
Oh yes, there was.
There was. I'm sorry.
Correct. And that's what can be modified for the different events. But there was electronic sound masking. at the, like where the concealed lighting is, at that border,
Oh, okay.
at the ring.
All right. And it was great that you talked about the history of the hackers and how that continues. And so Debbie McDonald was asking, wondering whether you could actually park a car on the new Skylight. I know that that police car was not actually a full authentic. It wasn't an actual car. It was parts that were a little bit of sleight of hand. But anyway, was that taken into account then for future vehicles?
I don't have the, I looked up, I tried to find it, but I think we're designed for at least 100 pounds per square foot, and I think maybe 125. So we're designed for future hacks. I don't believe we're designed for, a real car up there, but we are designed, even the Skylight is designed for that.
All right. David Torrey was also asking about the lights for the dome interior. The downlights, I guess, were hidden within the ring. Did that involve new, were there existing voids for that?
The uplights are within the ring, behind the leaves.
Oh, cove lights and.
Right, and then the downlights, we create this. There's voids between the, naturally between the dome and the oculus above. So, and we replaced the perimeter ones as well with new. So there were voids to install downlighting that we had to work with.
There were all Carl. There were penetrations made at all the soffits.
Yes.
Plaster was opened up and new devices were installed and then filled back in. So
Correct.
it wasn't just changing out temperature.
Oh, no.
It was all fixtures. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're all pretty advanced fixtures.
And Sarah Wormill, construction history, construction technology historian, asked who called the building design an elegant warehouse? Was that Bosworth's words? Or?
My understanding is that it is Bosworth's words.
Yeah.
Or at least Gary Tondorf's words, but
yeah.
It's I believe it's Bosworth's.
Yeah.
Words.
Well, it certainly seems appropriate, fitting, I think.
Yes.
I believe those are the questions I found in the chat. Are there any other anyone wants to feel free? Any live questions? While we're doing that, I guess if you could stop the sharing, that would be great. There we go. All right, well, thank you again. This was fabulous. Great to see the transformation. Love to. It's not as easy to get into the infinite corridor as it was back in my high school days. You get to walk through, but I'd love to sneak in there at some point and get a look just to admire the work. So. Thanks again for taking the time and sharing your work on that I hope is ongoing. And then there's more. So thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you can see from the agenda, just some announcements of a number of things coming up, conferences, and in fact, the end of July, the Dismantle Preservation Unconference comes back, so I have some links for that. The statewide Massachusetts Historic Preservation Conference in mid-September. I guess we're past the deadline for proposals for that, but they're call for sessions, but save the date anyway for that. The APT, Association for Preservation Technology Conference, they did, after I'm sure going back and forth, decided to keep it as a virtual conference, Washington, D.C., October 25th to 29th. save the date as well for the Preservation Alliance, the annual Preservation Achievement Awards. Some wonderful projects. Many of you are were involved and responsible for earning some of those awards, and that's Wednesday, October 27th. I'm sure there'll be details forthcoming. With that, please pipe in if there are any other announcements or anything anyone wants to share. I'll just say otherwise, just a reminder that we have our summer break for August, so we'll be back, expect to be back in September. Not sure if it's probably virtual, but there was a questionnaire that went out, at least to committee chairs, the SA committee chairs, about what we'd be willing to do. And so whether it's in person or hybrid, stay tuned. Anyone have anything?
Jack?
Yes. Sarah.
I'll be presenting a history of the origins of general contracting for buildings at the Codes Committee meeting on July 21st.
Thank you so much for reminding me. So, yeah, our committee, I didn't have to do anything, but we're co-sponsoring that, and it'll be. You know what time that'll be? That meeting? Do they do midday?
Let's see. I think it starts. Sorry, but I think it starts maybe 8:30 with a half hour of review of developments and legislation and so forth, and then my presentation will begin. So yeah. I'll be presenting about the beginnings of the field of general contracting for buildings in the 19th century.
Yeah. Sarah puts together wonderful, engaging educational talks. Her work as a historian, preservation consultant. So yes, that's try to join for that as well. So I guess that's it. So we will hope to see you then, and in any case, in September. And oh, I just see Peggy was just chiming in about the MIT project. Was honored at the Cambridge Historical Commission's Preservation Awards this year. So bravo for that as well. So okay, so see you, everyone.
See you in September.
Thanks again. All right. Bye.